Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals Videogram on conflict resolution. And this video really closely corresponds with many of our crisis intervention courses themselves that we have here at AIHCP. So whenever there is human interaction, there is bound to be conflict. Human beings are social creatures and they interact with one another. And because of that, not everyone is going to see the same thing the same particular way. And when this occurs, verbal disagreements can occur. It can be minor or major, and it can merely be verbal or it can become very hostile. It can be very hostile at a personal, family, business, social, or even national levels. So there might be personal vendettas, but when conflict occurs, it can also be at a much higher level where nations are at risk, where wars themselves can occur instead of just a particular conflict, maybe over a parking spot itself. So there is a wide range here of how conflict can occur, and it's important to understand how to resolve conflicts, whether at a micro or a macro level itself. And it all stems whether we're dealing with nations or if we're dealing with individuals, emotion. Many times emotion can play a negative role in negotiations or any type of conflict resolution. So anger management and calmness is a key, and that is also something that AIHCP offers, an anger management consulting certification. And through better anger management, we're able to let go of the past, identify possible triggers of self or one's personal ideal, and to better communicate the thoughts itself. It's also important when we're emotionally stirred to identify one's own biases, avoiding slurs and insults, and employing de-escalation strategies themselves that make people less angry instead of accusing an individual or insulting an individual to de-escalate the situation. I think part of this comes to understanding the character of oneself and the other. A type A personality, which is more aggressive, assertive, leadership, or a type B personality, which is less aggressive. It is more passive and willing to listen. So if you have a certain particular personality and you can read that personality, then you have a better chance of being able to come across more sensible to that individual, as well as finding a better solution. Also, what type of temperament are they? There's a variety of temperaments that are more aggressive, more passive, or more assertive. And one needs to know the various temperaments one is dealing with. In regards to whether or not a person is type A or type B, or whether one is emotionally triggered or not, communication is key in any type of negotiation, any type of discussion, any type of debate, or any type of treaty at a national level itself. So it involves identifying the situation and issues that surround it. It's seeing and being able to articulate both sides of the discussion. It involves listening and taking turns to present instead of each other trying to shout over one another. It also includes presenting one's points in a logical fashion, built upon each other, leading to a conclusion. It involves also an understanding of supporting justice. And in supporting justice, one is able to see beyond one's own selfishness and to be able to see what is good for the overall. Justice looks at giving to what is deserved to one's party or the other party even, without wanting to take what is not yours. You want to avoid also in this type of communication loaded language that can incur anger, that can incur wrath from the other party itself, slurs. Avoid ad hominem argumentation itself, where instead of criticizing the argument, one criticizes the person presenting the argument. And this is one of the most misused critical thinking maladies that exists. It exists when individuals try to insult instead of articulating against a particular position itself. Also, physical gestures, aggressiveness, and how one moves and speaks and the tone in which they use can play a negative role in negotiations. I also have a few more that I would like to bring up that aren't actually listed. Understanding context of the content that's being presented. A lot of times individuals will present a particular content or story, but what is their context? What is their angle? What are they looking to get out of? Maybe they're speaking about another individual or another thing that they want to accomplish. What is the context then of the particular content being presented? And of course, it is also important to respond, but not react. So we look at many individuals when they're trying to communicate a thought process and they react. And react, again, goes back to the previous slide and emotion. Reactions are quick, they're not logical. They respond without thinking. A response, though, is something that has been thought about, articulated. It's not emotional, it's based in logic, and it responds in a way that is not forcefully looking to attack, but to look at the situation in itself. So a response is by far more logical than what we would see in a mere reaction. When we come across these types of conflict resolutions and ways to de-escalate, there are certain ways that things are resolved. Some of them are better, some of them are far worse, and they lead to future conflicts. And we see this in a multitude of conflicts throughout the world at a national level, where one war will lead to another war. And usually it's because of a particular deficiency within the particular treaty or agreement. And this again can occur at the micro level with divorced parties and unhappy couples who separate and they continue to have issues because it wasn't resolved properly. So here we have what we refer to as the Thomas Kilmann model, and he looks at 5 particular ways things are resolved, the ones that are the worst and the ones that are also better. So when we're in the process of dialogue, conflicts that are resolved usually have what we refer to as a collaboration. A collaboration means there's a long-term settlement, whether it's micro level or the macro level, and both parties are working together. So this is probably the best way to resolve an issue is through collaboration. Compromise, according to Thomas Kilmann, is not as good. It gives you a short-term settlement, but at least both parties not completely satisfied, but partly satisfied. They didn't get everything they wanted, but at least there is a short-term settlement and individuals are able to continue. And we see a lot of compromises that are made in the Middle East, and they're only short-term because the two individuals within this region are not working together. There is also a thing referred to within the Thomas Kilmann model as accommodation. So it's a short-term settlement, but leaves the other party completely upset. So one party accommodated way too much, gave up way too much. And in this way, we see in particular, probably at the end of World War I, the Versailles Treaty, where Germany left very uncontent with all of the things that were thrown on her. And in that regard, the hostilities were settled, but there was resentment that built until nationalism came back through Hitler and World War II would emerge. So accommodation is definitely not the answer to a conflict. So we also have what we refer to as competition. That leaves both parties at odds, wanting everything. And when no resolution comes, the competition will continue. There has to be a way to find for the parties to come to either compromise or a collaboration of some type so that the competition ceases. Now, one final one that we see in a lot of cases, especially at the micro level, personal level, is the avoidance of the conflict altogether, where one party leaves completely unresolved because they are so passive. And this can happen with a lot of individuals that are type B personalities. So an individual that wants no conflict, doesn't want to deal with it, maybe in a divorce, They don't want to cause any problems, and they end up leaving secretly resentful because they're more passive and they're not as aggressive in itself. So collaboration is the best, compromise is the second best. Accommodation usually doesn't work out because one party leaves. Competition is when no resolution can be resolved. And then we have what we refer to as avoidance, where one party is secretly upset but doesn't really want to deal with it. And that's more so in micro cases, personal cases itself. So those are a few resolutions of conflict at a micro and macro level and how they are resolved. Of course, the biggest thing is how well we control ourselves emotionally through anger management and how well we're able to de-escalate. And that goes through communication. How do we communicate to one another? How do we respect each other? How do we logically discern and identify and articulate arguments? And how well do we communicate them to other individuals without insulting one another or reacting to one another, instead responding to one another? We offer here a crisis intervention certification, as well as an anger management program for qualified professionals. There's our link for the crisis intervention and anger management link below. Our email is info@aihcp.org, and our phone number is 330-652-7776. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.